But there's a couple problems with charging terrorism. It opens the door to all the evidence as to why Mangione did this. And if I'm prosecuting this case, the last thing I want to talk about is the health insurance industry and Thompson and how much money he's making.
Testimony continued today in the most notorious criminal trial in which Dr. John Boyle is accused of killing his wife, Maureen.
The boy confidently told the jury it was his decision to testify against his father.
I heard a scream. I heard a thud. It's about this loud.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty.
I decided at an early age that our trauma should not be what defines us. It's what we choose to do with it that does. I'm here to share my unique perspective on true crime, mental health, society, and popular culture, and always with a slight sense of humor. I'm Collier Landry, and welcome to my show. My guest today is Neama Rahmani. He is a former federal prosecutor. He is the president of West Coast Trial Lawyers, and he is a television commentator and legal analyst. You've seen him on Fox News, News Nation, everywhere. The guy is everywhere. Mover Nation, I am pleased to welcome back to the program, Neama Rahmani. All right, so Neama Rahmani, thank you so much for joining the program again today. There's been a little movement in Luigi Mangione, and I'm so excited to learn what you're thinking about this case, because there's so much nuance to this, the public discord over the online social media presence, this jury nullification, the Alvin Bragg overcharging, all of these things. And with this federal indictment that came down today, I'm curious what your thoughts are. So thank you so much for joining the program again.
Of course, thanks for having me. Really a fascinating case. I can't recall a criminal defendant, much less an accused murderer, that has so much sympathy. I mean, people listening and watching the show, people following on social media, traditional media, a lot of people love him. I mean, he's smart. He comes from a rich family. To be honest, he's good looking. Now he's famous. He's raging against the health insurance industry. Obviously, look, I don't condone violence, but I've never seen anything like it. And like you said, if I'm prosecuting this case, I am very concerned about jury nullification, because he has a lot of support, and that's not something that you typically see, and I've never seen in my entire legal career.
And for our audience that doesn't know what jury nullification is, what exactly is it? And have we seen cases of this before?
Probably the best example is OJ, and jury nullification is this. Even if you think someone is guilty, you're going to vote to acquit because of some reason. Now, in the OJ case, it was probably the distaste and dislike of LAPD and the racism of Detective Furman and others. And maybe they were upset at the white police officers being acquitted in the Rodney King case, and they wanted to send a message. I don't know if that case was necessarily about sympathy for OJ, even though obviously he was a celebrity, a pretty famous football player and actor. But in the Luigi Mangione case, some people just really like this guy and think he stands up against, really, it's a David versus Goliath situation. He's standing up against this evil health insurance CEO that is killing people, and maybe not through shooting them in the head, but through prior authorizations, claim denials, you name it. A lot of people are frustrated with their health insurance company, and they blame a lot of the nation's medical problems on hospitals and insurance companies. Let's be honest, people don't like insurance companies at all. It doesn't matter what type it is. They put profits over people. So I deal with them every single day in my legal career. But it's a unique case because, jury nullification, remember, as a prosecutor, you got to get 12 out of 12 jurors unanimously. If one of those stealth jurors makes it on the panel and they are determined to acquit no matter what, to send a message to executives, health insurance companies, prosecutors, there's really nothing you can do. So that's really what jury nullification is. Jurors that disregard the law and vote based on some personal belief that doesn't necessarily have to do with the law in the case.
You and I talked about the Karen Reed case before, and obviously this public, massive interest on both sides of it. At least, it seemed to be centered around Boston and in Massachusetts where all this was taking place. But, then it kind of spread out. This was worldwide from Jump Street. And when you're looking at a case of this magnitude, I know that he's retained a new counsel, Karen Friedman Agnifilo, who is representing him, I believe, in New York. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And Mark's wife, who was representing Diddy. So, I mean, Karen is great. She was the number 2 in Alvin Bragg's office. She knows the New York criminal justice system very well. And now we're looking at a federal indictment as well. So I'm not sure if she's going to be handling both cases or just the state case, but really an outstanding lawyer hired by Luigi or his family.
What happened to the original lawyer that he had?
So that was a Pennsylvania lawyer who was retained for the purpose of maybe contesting extradition. So extradition, we think about it, someone flees to another country and they're being extradited back to the United States. Even within states, folks have to be transferred or extradited. And it's really a question of identity. Is the person that's named in the New York arrest warrant the same person that was arrested at the Pennsylvania McDonald's on gun charges? If it's the same person, it's not like Pennsylvania can say no. There's the full faith and credit clause of the Constitution that says there's a valid arrest warrant and this is the individual named in that warrant. They have to be extradited. The governor's sign. But in that particular case, the Pennsylvania lawyer, or really it was the New York lawyer, said, listen, fighting extradition is just a waste of time. Obviously, this is Luigi Mangione. Let's go fight the more serious New York charges.
This brought up a conversation about dual sovereignty. How does that play out in this particular situation?
Yeah, so now we're getting news today that the feds are going to charge Mangione as well. And I have a lot to say about that. But one of the common questions I get is, well, doesn't that violate double jeopardy? It can't be charged twice for the same crime. There is an important exception, and that's the dual sovereign doctrine, which says that the state can prosecute you and the feds can as well. It doesn't typically happen, so it's pretty strange or weird that it's happening in this case, and we'll get into that a bit. We have seen it when there's a potential high-profile civil case. Going back to Rodney King, right? The officers were acquitted in state court. They were retried in federal court. Some of them were convicted. Some of them were acquitted again in federal court. 2 recent cases where this came up was Derek Chauvin and George Floyd. Chauvin was prosecuted by the state and the feds. And then if you remember, the McMichaels and one other individual, Roddy Bryan, were charged with the death of Ahmaud Arbery in what many folks considered a modern-day lynching in Georgia. Yeah. So that was another case. Again, not something you typically see, and this is why it's not a good use of resources. And for decades, the Department of Justice has had actually a policy on this. It was by an individual named Pettit. It was pretty high-ranking. That's called the Pettit policy, and it says that the feds don't get involved with a subsequent federal prosecution after the state has started unless there is a compelling federal interest that isn't vindicated in the state case. So if you're talking about civil rights, maybe that's something that's important. You don't want people to be killed on the basis of their race. But typically, murder is not a federal crime. It's almost exclusively a state crime. So you kind of have the feds piling on here a little bit. And obviously, look, this is probably the biggest case in the country right after Diddy or close to it. And, you have President-elect Trump talking about it. He's going to have a new attorney general. One really important thing to note is New York doesn't have the death penalty. It hasn't had the death penalty for 20 years. The federal government does have the death penalty. So is the new attorney general, Pam Bondi, is she going to come in and try to get a death sentence for Luigi Mangione? Even if she does, is that to try to negotiate some sort of plea agreement? So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens on the federal side of things.
Yeah, one of the things that I was reading is they're this terrorism charge, this domestic terrorism charge, which the FBI defines as a violent criminal acts committed by individuals or groups to further ideological goals stemming from domestic influences such as political, religious, social, racial, environmental nature, and includes activities involving acts dangerous in human life that are a violation of criminal laws in the United States, acts appearing to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, influence a policy or government by intimidation or coercion, and affect conduct of a government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping. How do they think this is going to stick? I mean, it says assassination, but UnitedHealthcare CEO is not exactly a political figure.
No, and he's not. And I have concerns. Again, this is coming from a former prosecutor who was charging terrorism. One, it's a little bit of a legal stretch, right? Terrorism, I know that was a long definition, but for folks watching, it's really one of two things: an act of violence intended to intimidate the public or to influence the government. So, regardless of what this is, obviously we know that Mangione had a manifesto and he had some pretty strong feelings about the health insurance industry. But there's a couple problems with charging terrorism. First of all, it opens the door to all the evidence as to why Mangione did this. And if I'm prosecuting this case, the last thing I want to talk about is the health insurance industry and Thompson and how much money he's making and how many claims they're denying and all this stuff, because all of a sudden it makes the case about health insurance. I want to keep all that out of the trial. Keep it very simple. Have the judge, because when you get into terrorism, his intent, his reason why all becomes relevant. So I think it's a strategic mistake. Now, New York law is interesting in that first degree is very narrow. First degree, I'm talking first degree murder. So first degree murder in states like California, where I am, if it's premeditated, you lie in wait, all those things is first degree murder. Not necessarily in New York. You need something a little more. So they're trying to get from second degree murder to first degree murder, and terrorism gets you there in New York. But the problem is there's no death penalty. It opens the door to all this evidence. And second degree murder carries a sentence of 15 to life. You get to first degree murder, it's 20 to 25 to life. You don't get a mandatory life sentence. So it brings in all this evidence. It could potentially get sympathy for Mangione or really have an explanation or sort of mitigation or whatever you want to call it. And it could really muddy up the case. So look, Alvin Bragg, the DA there, has made some mistakes in other high profile cases. I mean, Donald Trump, a lot of people think he overcharged that case, should have been a misdemeanor, charged it way late. Daniel Perry, right? He charged manslaughter, probably shouldn't have charged the manslaughter, maybe negligent homicide. He even conceded self-defense in that case. This is another case where, look, if you overcharge the case, sometimes it can really backfire, and that's the concern here. The other issue with terrorism is it makes it a federal crime. Now, it appears the feds in the complaint they unsealed, they're focused on the interstate component of it, him traveling from Atlanta, and so they're trying to get a federal jurisdiction on that basis. But it does also make it a federal crime, which makes Donald Trump's new attorney general, and we know that Donald Trump doesn't like Alvin Bragg, he might step in and just more or less take over this case. So that's a potential problem with terrorism as well.
Yeah, I think you and I have discussed before this maneuvering by prosecutors and the danger of, I think we were talking about Karen Reed with the conspiracy and opening the doors to those, right, that her defense successfully did, or at least to a certain degree. But if you would mention that really with O.J. Simpson trial specifically, it was putting the LAPD on trial. Like, his lawyers were very successful at doing that, correct? And is this open the door for the exact same thing? Like, now we're not talking about the murder of this guy. We're talking about the healthcare system.
Oh, it does. And, and going back to Karen Reed, by the way, Karen Reed, another case where I think the Commonwealth overcharged the case, charging the second degree murder when, I'm not saying I believe the, conspiracy theory, the murder and the cover up by law enforcement, but it seems like she was under the influence. She hit her boyfriend, O'Keefe, and she drove off. It seems like more of a manslaughter case. You charge too much, you really lose credibility. But in Karen Reed, I think one key difference is there's at least an alternate theory of the case, right? It's not like, well, we think, Karen Reed did it, but, her boyfriend was toxic and abusive, and we're just going to give her a break. There's some other direction the jury can go in. But here, I don't think there's much of a defense to say that it wasn't Luigi Mangione. I mean, look, his fingerprint is on that cell phone that he reportedly discarded. His DNA is on that water bottle. There's video evidence of him.
And there's a manifesto.
Yeah, his manifesto. It's written, like, he's there, So can't say it wasn't me. What are you going to say? I didn't mean to do it. You have a 3D printed ghost gun and a silencer. It's clearly an assassination. So
Yeah.
a very tough case to defend because there's no really other theory. But like you said, putting health insurance on trial is by far the best defense strategy here. And the DA's office has just walked into that trap. So again, just strategic mistake. Prosecutors make mistakes all the time. And I think this is one that they made here.
Yeah, and there's no walking it back now, is there?
No, I mean, they could, go and dismiss and refile. But, when you have a press conference and Bragg's there and talking about how this is terrorism, he's going to have some egg on his face. And let's be honest. I mean, he's a politician and he's probably stinging from the penny loss. That was a pretty high profile case. So for him to walk back and say, no, this isn't terrorism anymore. I made a mistake. I think that's not going to happen. He's sort of made his bed.
Oh man, there was a movie that came out recently, Joker Folly Do, and it was a very interesting, I felt, social commentary on our obsession with true crime and the salaciousness of this event. And I was explaining this to a friend of mine, and they said, "Well, what is the deal?" I said, "You saw that movie, right? You like that movie?" She was like, "Yeah, I like it." I said, I guarantee this is going to play out. People are having costumes made of this guy inside of a day, and he has a legal defense fund now. I think it's approaching $150,000, and these calls of social media for this jury nullification again. How does this? We saw it play out in Karen Reed a little bit or a lot with social media. Do you anticipate that is going to be a major factor in this trial?
I think it's going to be Karen Reed on steroids. We're talking about next level. And there's many reasons why. I mean, imagine a Johnny Depp type circus. I mean, that's what I'm expecting in this case. People absolutely love this guy. And I'm not saying I agree, but I understand it. He's sort of this class warfare, privileged individual who sort of gave it all up to kind of send this message that, people are frustrated. And again, I just got to make it clear before I get all the hate comments, Neama, you're condoning murder. I'm absolutely not. There's no excuse for violence, regardless of your political belief. Doesn't matter. But there are people that absolutely love Luigi Mangione and the way he is fighting and continuing to fight, and is just very limited public comments and presence as he's traveling to and from court. I think this will only continue. And really, the only thing that the prosecution has in its favor is that New York State is one of the few states that doesn't allow cameras in the courtroom for any reason. Otherwise, yeah, it's just state law. And obviously, there's no cameras in federal court anywhere in the country. If this was live streamed, I mean, the entire world would be watching every single court appearance.
That's a great point. I did not know that. And you and I have discussed that. You feel that cameras should be allowed in the courtroom because it shows our justice system, right?
I do. We have a presumption that our trials are open to the public. We don't have secret trials in this country. So, you're going to have people that are members of the media, members of the public that will be doing everything they can to be in that courtroom. Why not avoid all that and just let a camera run, let the public see for themselves and decide? I think that's very important. And that's why I do so much live trial commentary on different networks. I really do believe in it.
Karen Reed on steroids. That's a great point. Yeah, it's going to be a absolute fiasco. You talk about him being a folk hero. I talk about this. There's a lot of people that have obsession with serial killers, John Wayne Gacy, those types. Charlie Manson. They become sycophants in a lot of ways, and they themselves become celebrities. Have we ever? I mean, I know Robert Durst came from a family. You had John DuPont came from a wealthy family that committed these heinous acts. But have you ever seen a defendant like this? Sort of, there's this Robin Hood element of it, right?
Yeah, it really is. Robin Hood's probably the best way to describe him. Where again, valedictorian of his school, family's worth millions, tens of millions of dollars, right? Ivy League graduate. Really, by all accounts, a very smart guy. And probably the closest example, maybe in terms of his intelligence and his political belief, and someone that he apparently followed is, Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, right? I mean, the difference, of course, being the Unabomber was off the grid in Montana, no electricity, no running water. Obviously, a very different time in American history in terms of law enforcement technology, but that's why it took so long to find him. But someone that is just brilliant and really a true believer. And we don't know what happened. There's all sorts of speculation that, he had this back surgery and he got on psychedelics and, things went sideways there. But when you have this manifesto, when you have these fake IDs, this cash, I mean, this is someone that really plotted and planned this in a way that really I haven't seen an accused murderer be this careful in a long time. Probably maybe Brian Koberger, and in Idaho, he was also very careful in terms of how he sort of plotted this. Now, obviously, we know that Mangione made some mistakes in terms of, like I said, the DNA shell casings and that type of thing. But, in terms of murders and the fact that we did a nationwide manhunt for 5 days before we caught this guy, and when he was in plain sight in a neighboring state, leads me to believe that this guy's very intelligent. So it's going to be interesting to see what sort of defense he puts up at trial. I don't think it's going to take a plea. I don't see any basis for him to do so. Bragg's office isn't going to make any type of meaningful offer. So is he going to just get up there and talk about all the reasons why he did this and roll the dice? It's going to be very interesting.
There's an interesting parallel here too with P. Diddy, and you mentioned it earlier, where his new lawyer, she is married. Karen Friedman Agnifilo is married to Mark Agnifilo, who is representing Diddy, who represented, I believe, cult leader Keith Raniere, a really high profile Farmer Bro, Martin Shkreli. This family seems to have a lock on the biggest cases right now in this country. What is this sort of going on with the Diddy case, and to sort of switch gears now because there's a new lawsuit that's been filed by some men against him? And what are things looking at? We're 138 days away from a scheduled start of his trial.
We're scheduled at least to start on May 5th, so it's around the corner. And like you said, you have Mark and Karen here, really New York's power couple when it comes to criminal representation. Diddy, I think, is in a world of hurt. I know we've talked about it, but obviously a different type of case with a lot of victims that are coming forward. And, maybe some of them have been discredited just a bit on the civil side, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. But I think the sheer number of victims is going to be very difficult for Diddy to overcome. Obviously, there's that 2016 video of him beating longtime girlfriend Cassie Ventura. She's going to be the star witness in this case. She's the one that really opened the floodgates with her lawsuit that she filed in November 2023. But I expect the U.S. Attorney's Office to pick a handful of the best witnesses, maybe a dozen, maybe a half dozen, put them on the stand, the ones that have the best stories, the ones that have been most consistent. And the other concern I have for the defense, and this is great for the prosecution, is what I expect to be the sheer amount of video evidence in the case. And if you believe Cassie Ventura, and I do, Combs recorded many of these freak-offs for his own sexual pleasure and to hold some sort of control over the participants. So if there's video of all this happening, he's done. And that's not even counting the potential that new charges are added later for obstruction of justice and sex trafficking of minors. I mean, I think Diddy's done.
Yeah, and you mentioned the sheer volume of witnesses. That again, Keith Raniere had dozens of witnesses against him at his trial, if I'm not mistaken, and he's doing 150 years or something like that.
Yeah, the Nexium case, was one of the kind of the R. Kelly, Nexium. We're seeing these RICO indictments and sex trafficking, obviously unique cult case, and we know RICO is very strong because it brings in a lot of evidence and a lot of people into the indictment. And those lesser individuals, like the folks working for Combs, they're on the hook for the sex trafficking, even if they just got the drugs and secured the sex workers, right? So it's a very powerful statute. So the other concern for the defense is people that are rolling and cooperating in the case, right? Someone like Christina Joram, Diddy's chief of staff, she's gotten a lot of attention because she's been really MIA, but I think she knows where the bodies are buried. So you may have those types of witnesses as well. And obviously everyone that's watching the show wants to know about other celebrities, right? And we know there's one civil complaint against Jay-Z. Is that a one-off, or is that the first celebrity domino to fall? Are we going to start hearing about other people? I mean, I think the coming weeks and months are going to be really telling.
Yeah, and then, also Cuba Gooding Jr., I believe, was implicated in some of this early on.
Yes.
The Jay-Z revelation seems to be the most shocking, and not surprising, but most shocking, I think. Do you anticipate Diddy taking a deal?
I don't think so, because what sort of deal is he going to take that's not going to require him spending 10 or more years in federal prison, right? Here's someone that has been fighting tooth and nail. He finally just stopped to get out pending trial, right? So this is someone with a lot of money, someone that has beaten criminal charges before. Obviously, very different case, the New York nightclub shooting case with J-Lo, but this is someone that's going to dig in his heels. And really, what could he do to plead right now? He'd have to accept responsibility for everything, maybe name names.
Yeah.
But really, who could he name that's more culpable than him? He seems to be kind of the head of the organization, right, in terms of the sex trafficking enterprise. So maybe he could shave off a little bit of time if he cooperated, but I don't see that happening.
I mean, I think he's done myself. I mean, I don't see how he gets out of this. It just seems very overwhelming. Shifting back to Mangione, though, and I know this is just speculation, and you can tell me I want to talk about it, but do you think that we're going to see a surprise revelation that he didn't act alone? Do you think he acted alone? Who was he on the phone with, on the burner phone with? How did he know all these whereabouts? I mean,
he may have had some help. Obviously, it was a pretty elaborate plan. It's very possible that someone else was with him. I think we'll know pretty soon, because that individual should probably be arrested, because there's a real risk that they're going to flee. I'm surprised Mangione didn't flee, by the way, because he was able to escape through Central Park, and the fact that he was just hanging out at a McDonald's, it was pretty surprising. But yeah, there may absolutely be more people involved. I'm sure if they are, they'll be charged. But again, you're talking about a case where even if there's other folks that are co-conspirators or accomplices or accessories, Mangione is the most culpable, right? He's the trigger man, right? He's caught on video. So what kind of deal could there be for him to roll on someone? Usually when you flip people as a prosecutor, you want to flip them up, not down. You're not trying to get people that are less responsible.
Got it. Yeah, I wondered about the firearm that was 3D printed. Like, did he do that? Did he get that? I would imagine there's some sort of ballistics test or some sort of test that they can test the plastic where it maybe came from. I mean, they can source everything nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to have ballistics experts that are going to tie the firearm, which was on his person when he was arrested, to the one used at the scene. So, yeah, you're going to see those types of witnesses disclosed by the government, and they're absolutely going to testify that same individual, same firearm, same shell casings that were used to kill Brian Thompson.
Yeah, but even the manufacturer of that weapon, like, could they tie in somebody who manufactured that as well?
Potentially, in terms of a civil case. I mean, it's hard to sue gun manufacturers. There's some laws that protect them from liability at the federal level. So it is challenging. I don't expect that to be successful. If we're talking about other people that are responsible in a criminal case, especially, it's going to be individuals, not companies.
It's a very crazy case. Well, I appreciate all your. Do you have any other thoughts on Luigi Mangione?
No, I mean, it's a really fascinating case. I'm sure we're going to be covering a lot. Collier, I always appreciate you having me on the show.
Absolutely.
And we're going to be following this one very closely.
I appreciate that. Where can my audience find you?
You can find me at Neama Rahmani. That's NeamaRahmani on all social media platforms: LinkedIn, X, Instagram, TikTok, you name it, I'm on it.
Fabulous. I will have links to all of your links in the show notes of today's episode. Neama Rahmani, thank you so much for being on the program. Happy holidays to you, sir.
Happy holidays to you too. And if I don't talk to you, see you next year.
Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to support today's program, please click the links in the description of the show notes of today's episode. And if you like this video, check out this one right here or this one right here. And don't forget to like and subscribe, because it helps with the algorithm. On that note, I'm Collier Landry. I'll see y'all on the next one. Good girl, Marisol. Good girl.